The $50 bill crumpled between sweaty fingers as Miguel pressed it into the snitch's palm in the narrow bus bathroom. Through the thin door, he could hear Border Patrol agents moving down the aisle, checking documents row by row. The American retiree who'd spotted their nervousness and sold them out for a free ticket upgrade now held their fate in his greasy hands. One word from him, and it was over. But greed, Miguel had learned, was more reliable than conscience. The man's eyes glittered as he pocketed the money, already calculating how many more desperate migrants he could squeeze on future trips. The plan had started 3 weeks earlier in an internet cafe in Guadalajara. Miguel and his cousin Roberto had found a Facebook group advertising guaranteed safe passage on returning tour buses. American retirees visited Mexico by the thousands, and their buses crossed back with minimal inspection. For the right price, someone could arrange fake tour tickets, blend you in with the sunburned tourists, and deliver you to Houston or Phoenix or wherever the tour originated. $800 each for the tickets, another $200 for clothes that would help them blend in. Khaki shorts, polo shirts, baseball caps with American logos. They'd spent days practicing their roles, studying how American tourists behaved. Roberto, who'd worked in Cancun hotels, coached Miguel on the casual entitlement, the loud voices, the way they moved through space as if they owned it. The transformation felt like putting on an uncomfortable costume. The boarding point was a hotel in Nuevo Laredo, where the tour had stopped for one night. Their contact, a Mexican employee of the tour company, had slipped them into the group during confusion of evening activities. Suddenly, they were Tom and Jerry from Phoenix, complete with Arizona driver's licenses that would pass casual inspection. The other two in their group, Maria and her teenage daughter Sophia, became their wives for the journey, a family returning from vacation. The bus itself was a rolling piece of America, air-conditioned luxury with reclining seats and tiny televisions. The tourists, mostly retirees from Sunbelt states, treated it like their personal domain. They complained about the food, the accommodations, the locals who didn't speak English. Miguel and Roberto nodded along, trying to mimic the casual disdain, while their hearts hammered with fear. For the first 2 hours, everything went perfectly. They'd taken seats in the middle of the bus, not too far forward where they draw attention, not too far back where troublemakers sat. Maria played the tired wife perfectly, pretending to sleep against the window. Sophia, only 16 but aged by attempted crossings, stared at her phone like any American teenager. They were invisible in their ordinariness. But Harold from Nebraska had been watching, a retired insurance investigator. He later told authorities, trained to spot fraud. He noticed how Tom and Jerry's hands shook slightly when handling their tickets, how their wives seemed to flinch when spoken to in English, how they paid for snacks with crumpled small bills instead of credit cards like everyone else. His suspicions grew with each mile toward the border. The tour guide, a harried woman named Brenda who'd been dealing with complaints all week, didn't initially respond to Harold's concerns. She had 52 passengers to manage, and frankly, she didn't care if a few were irregular as long as they caused no trouble. But Harold persisted, mentioning words like liability and federal crime and CNN investigation. Finally, to shut him up, she promised to alert authorities at the border. Miguel noticed Harold watching them, saw him whispering to other passengers, pointing discreetly in their direction. The comfortable invisibility they'd cultivated began to evaporate. Other tourists started glancing over, conversations stopping when they passed. Roberto tried to maintain character, loudly discussing baseball with another passenger, but his knowledge of American sports was Wikipedia thin. The crisis moment came at a rest stop 50 miles from the border. Harold cornered Miguel by the vending machines, his investigator instincts fully engaged. He asked probing questions about Phoenix, about their supposed neighborhood, about details only a real resident would know. Miguel fumbled through rehearsed answers, but Harold's satisfied smirk said he'd already decided. That's when Harold made his proposition. He didn't care about immigration law, he explained, but this Mexico trip had been expensive, more than his pension comfortably allowed. If Tom and Jerry wanted to remain Tom and Jerry, perhaps they could help with his financial situation. $500, and he developed sudden amnesia about his suspicions. Otherwise, Border Patrol would be very interested in his observations. The shakedown was so casual, so practiced, that Miguel realized Harold had done this before. How many desperate migrants had paid for his silence on these tours? The retiree enjoyed a lucrative side business, spotting nervous faces and converting fear into cash. The tour companies looked the other way. The other passengers remained oblivious, and Harold supplemented his retirement income with human desperation. Miguel had only $300 left after paying for the tickets and clothes. Roberto had even less. They pooled resources with Maria, who contributed her daughter's college savings, scraped together $450. Harold examined the bills like a banker, then shook his head. 500 or Border Patrol. Those were the options. That's when Sophia surprised everyone. The teenager, who'd been silent the entire journey, pulled out a phone newer than anything her mother could afford. She'd been carrying it for her boyfriend in Houston. She admitted, planning to sell it once they arrived. It was worth at least $200. Harold examined it with his appraiser's eye, nodded, and pocketed it along with the cash. The deal was struck, but trust was impossible. As the bus rolled toward the border, Harold kept watching them, and they watched him. Would he keep his word? Would greed override greed? The other passengers, oblivious to the drama playing out in their midst, chatted about dinner plans and hotel reservations. Only the 5 conspirators understood the stakes of the next few hours. The border checkpoint at Laredo appeared like a monument to American authority. Multiple lanes, drug-sniffing dogs, agents with mirrors checking under vehicles. The tour bus was directed to a special lane for commercial vehicles. Miguel's mouth went dry as he watched Harold lean forward, whispering something to Brenda, the tour guide. She looked surprised, then concerned, then resigned. When the Border Patrol agents boarded, Harold's performance was masterful. He made eye contact with each officer. The concerned citizen wanted to do his duty. He pointed out suspicious behavior, mentioned overheard conversations, suggested which passengers deserved extra scrutiny. The agents, accustomed to such tips, began moving through the bus with purpose. But Harold, true to his word, pointed at the wrong seats. He identified a confused couple from Minnesota as suspicious, mentioned strange behavior from a family that was entirely American. The agents, following his misdirection, began checking documents in the back of the bus, while Miguel's group sat frozen in the middle, afraid to breathe. The Minnesota couple, indignant at being questioned, demanded to know who had reported them. Harold shrugged, suggested maybe he'd been mistaken. It was hard to keep track of so many faces. The agents, finding nothing irregular, seemed annoyed at the false alarm. They conducted a cursory check of other passengers, but the momentum of suspicion had been broken. Just as it seemed they would escape, one agent stopped at their row. He examined Roberto's fake Arizona license with professional scrutiny. Something in Roberto's face, the sweat despite the air conditioning, the way his eyes darted, triggered instinct honed by years of border work. The agent asked Roberto to step off the bus for additional screening. The moment fractured the group. Roberto looked at Miguel, a lifetime of communication in that glance, then stood and followed the agent. Miguel wanted to follow, to maintain the cousin act, but Maria's hand on his arm stopped him. One loss was better than 4. Roberto understood, had always been the one willing to sacrifice. He walked off the bus with dignity, not looking back. The remaining agents finished their check and departed. The bus was clear to continue, minus 1 passenger. Harold caught Miguel's eye and shrugged, as if to say he'd done his best but couldn't control everything. The tour guide announced they'd be delayed while paperwork was processed for the passenger who'd been removed. No one except Miguel's group knew Roberto's fate. The final miles to Houston were torture. Every moment Miguel expected the bus to be stopped again, for Roberto to reveal everything under questioning. Maria held Sophia tightly, whispering prayers. The other tourists complained about the delay, some making jokes about illegals that cut like knives. Harold sat contentedly, probably calculating how to spend his windfall. Houston appeared through the windshield, like a promise partially kept. 3 had made it, 1 had been taken. The arithmetic of crossing meant someone always paid the price. As the bus pulled into the station, passengers began gathering belongings, exchanging contact information, promising to share photos. Miguel's group prepared to disappear into the city's anonymity. But Harold had one more card to play. As they disembarked, he approached Miguel with a business card. He ran a consulting service, he explained, helping people navigate complex situations. For a reasonable fee, he could ensure safe passage on future trips, prevent misunderstandings with overzealous citizens. His network of retired investigators monitored multiple tour routes. Consider it insurance, he suggested. Miguel took the card without comment, understanding the ecosystem completely now. The tour companies that looked the other way, the employees who sold access, the retirees who supplemented pensions with human misery. Harold wasn't an anomaly, but part of a system that monetized desperation at every level. The border was just one obstacle in a gauntlet of predation. They scattered immediately upon leaving the station. Maria and Sophia had family waiting, disappearing into a minivan before Miguel could say goodbye. He found himself alone in Houston with $50, no cousin, and the knowledge that he'd made it by the narrowest margin. Roberto was probably in detention, facing deportation, paying the price for all of them. The job he'd arranged fell through when he arrived alone. Employers wanted pairs, teams who could vouch for each other. A single man was suspicious, unstable. Miguel found day labor eventually, standing on corners with others who'd made similar journeys. Some had crossed deserts, others rivers. His tourist bus story seemed almost quaint in comparison, except for the cousin-shaped hole in it. Weeks later, he received word through mutual friends. Roberto had been deported but was already planning another attempt. He didn't blame Miguel for continuing when he was caught. That had been the plan all along. Maximize success even if it meant splitting up. He'd try again, maybe the same route, maybe something different. The mathematics of desperation meant keeping trying until something worked. Miguel thought often about Harold. Probably run his scheme on another tour, spotting nervous faces and converting them to cash. How many times had he performed that same shakedown? How many families had he split with his selective blindness? The business card sat in Miguel's wallet, a reminder of how the border created opportunities for predators with every form of passport. The tourist bus route became legendary in certain circles. Stories spread of retirees who could be bought, tour guides who arranged passages, the exact amounts needed to ensure silence, but also warnings about the Harold types, the ones who saw profit in fear. The route evolved, adapted, continued. Desperation was endlessly creative, and so was exploitation. Miguel sent money to Roberto for his next attempt, knowing it might fund another failure. But what choice was there? The cousin who'd walked off that bus to save the rest deserved every chance. Maybe next time Harold would be sick, or the agent would be less observant, or the cards would fall differently. The border was a casino where the house always won, but people kept playing because the alternative was accepting poverty as permanent. He never took another bus. The memory of those hours, watching Harold perform his extortion, feeling Roberto's sacrifice, was too heavy. When others asked about his crossing, he mentioned the bus but not the betrayal, the success but not the cost. Let them imagine clean escapes and clever disguises. The truth, that making it meant leaving someone behind, was too bitter for hope to swallow. Sometimes Miguel saw tour buses in Houston, full of retirees returning from adventures. He wondered if Harold was aboard, scanning seats for profitable fear. If other families were being split by selective testimony. If the drivers knew their vehicles carried more than tourists. The buses rolled on mobile borders where papers mattered less than willingness to pay, where crossing meant not just reaching America, but surviving Americans who'd learned to profit from the attempt. His story ended not with triumph, but with survival, not with reunion, but with separation. 3 made it because 1 was taken. Harold got paid because desperation had a price. The border was crossed because someone always paid for passage, sometimes with money, sometimes with freedom. Miguel lived in Houston, worked in construction, sent money home and to Roberto for future attempts. But part of him remained on that bus, in that moment when his cousin stood up and walked away, purchasing their freedom with his capture. The arithmetic was simple and cruel. An economy of crossing. Someone always paid full price so others could travel at a discount. Harold had simply found a way to take his cut from the transaction, another middleman in the endless market of human hope.